Hello, my name is Silvester Henderson. I am the CEO and President of Professor for Life Incorporated. I am so glad this, I would say early morning, to interview CEO Ronald Hickey. On Professor for Life Incorporated, we interview academics, we interview corporate owners, we interview community figures, and all those individuals and professionals who impact the community. And I want to welcome Mr. CEO Ronald Hickey. Hello, sir.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes. Hello, as the CEO, Principal, Chief Business and Public Policy Consultant for Hickey Associates. And Hickey, please introduce your company to our digital media community.
Would be my pleasure. Hickey Associates and Hickey, we focus primarily on leadership development, not just on the molecular level with CEOs, those running organizations, but we also look at the youth, because the basis of our operations is that we want to make winners. We want to make winners that look like us. Our focus is on public policy, because we want smart winners and leaders within public policy, because we believe that those who look like us will create public policy that benefits anyone as much as it benefits everyone. And so we take that space seriously. So our focus is on leadership, every aspect of leadership as you can imagine, Professor Henderson.
Wow. Mr. Hickey, tell me, where did you grow up? And please share your academic journey and where did you attend college?
Absolutely. I grew up in Tennessee, this small enclave of African Americans in a little town called East Bakewell, Tennessee. That's about 30 minutes north of Chattanooga. Great community. I would not have traded it for anything. Great love. From there, I went to the University of Tennessee after graduating from a small school there in Sale Creek, Tennessee. My graduating class was around 60 people.
Wow.
From the University of Tennessee, I took a position with Naval Reactors and the Department of Defense. By the time I was 20, Dr. Henderson, I was managing 4 nuclear reactor plants for the Navy on board the USS Enterprise.
Wow.
But from there, I got a degree in business and public administration from the University of San Francisco. I did a course in facilities management because by that time I had moved into managing facility spaces, building public schools. So I took a course with Sac State in facilities management. And so I'm what you really refer to as a lifelong learner.
Wow. Okay. Very good. Can you describe your work and obligations as a visionary author, trainer, and leader for organizations such as the following: the Contra Costa County Office of the Sheriff, the National Association of Black Police Officers, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and 100 Black Men of America? Now, I would ask that you would tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've done for each of those organizations and how your visionary leadership has helped to impact those organizations in a positive way.
Absolutely. You're getting into the details of my law enforcement career. That lasted approximately 8 years along the way. And that was prior to me getting my degree in public administration. But what I did for Cocoa County Office of the Sheriff, I became the president of the National Association of Black Police Officers, the local chapter. From there, I did workshops on leadership for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. That was the chiefs, the captains within law enforcement of African American descent. And so in those spaces, including 100 Black Men, I've always said a leader can be born or a leader can be learned along the way. I was always a natural leader, Dr. Henderson. When I came in, my leadership skills, my abilities were always recognized immediately. So shortly after joining the sheriff's office, the current president of the local chapter of the National Association of Black Police Officers came in and asked me to be the next president. And so those roles always came automatic to me because of who I am by nature. And in that natural space, I always stepped up to the plate to provide leadership, training, leadership skills, leadership examples. I was always a model for leadership. So within that space of law enforcement, I traveled nationally at national conferences and other events held by local chapters, national chapters. And I always led leadership workshop. I always facilitated leadership keynote speeches. And so I always felt that was my bailiwick, if you will. That's why I was here. So I was always willing to be in the forefront of that conversation on what leadership could look like within the African-American community, within the industry that I worked in this particular time that you have focused on. That was during my law enforcement career. And at the same time, I had joined 100 Black Men of America. And I took the same roles and leadership within my local chapter of Sacramento, the Sacramento chapter of 100 Black Men of America. My initial leadership role was the chairman of the membership committee. Within a short period of time, I doubled our membership, and I led leadership workshops.
Wow. You know what? I'm gonna throw another question in. I just want to ask this question: how do you feel about some of the conflicts surrounding young African American males who are not focused sometimes, and sometimes that are focused, and the current national status around police officers, African American police officers or non-African American police officers, and the community perception of police officers and danger for young African American males? I would just love to hear your perspective about what are some of the things that the law agencies can do to improve the community relationships, but while at the same time honoring the restrictions they have to work under.
You know, great question. I'm going to start with the words of the great Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist. He said this years ago, Dr. Henderson. He talked about the downward spiral, the downward course that we can take as a community, and say when we come in that downward course, there's no resistance. The African American meets no resistance until he raises his head and says, I'm going to rise. And when we decide that we're going to rise, the national community and primarily the global community meets us with all resistance possible. So within that space, if a young African-American male shows up in rags, if he shows up wretchedness and in ignorance, he meets no resistance because he conforms to the popular belief of his character. And those are the words of Frederick Douglass. But as soon as we come in right and say that we are a scholar, a statesman, and a gentleman, then we are a contradiction. And in that contradiction, we're dealing with individuals who are poorly educated. And so when Vice President Kamala Harris was the district attorney of Sacramento, San Francisco County, she did a profile of the crime of murder. What she learned in that research was 94% of all murder victims and 94% of all murder suspects were undereducated. In law enforcement, if you look at all of the census murders of African-American males and some African-American females at the hands of white police officers, what you will find is that the suspect and the victim were all undereducated. So that drives that conversation around what is the importance of education. Education allows us not to act simply on impulse, but goes to our second choice, our third choice, our fourth choice. And those additional choices comes down to how well educated we are. Because infamously, you and I are looked on the same as that undereducated African-American male. Absolutely. But what you and I do, Dr. Henderson, we don't act simply on impulse. We go to that third option, that fourth option, that 10th option, because we smartly say, how do I get out of this encounter and get home safely? And so what I say to an African-American male, we cannot change who the police officers are, we cannot even change the education requirements of that industry. So we have to become better educated ourselves so that we're not limited to just acting on impulse. We can act with a great deal of intellect. Now, if we really want to change it globally, going back to public policy and the work that my institutions are doing, imagine if every police officer in this country had to have a master's degree. Intellectually and scholarly, it gives them access to additional information so that they don't simply look at an African-American male as someone who's come in ignorance and rags and wretchedness. He or she may say, hey, this guy could be a scholar. He could be Professor Henderson. He could be Ronald Hickey, well-educated, astute gentleman in their community. So therefore we get a level of respect in that encounter. But as long as we're left with an undereducated African-American male and an undereducated white male cop, there's always going to be conflict because they're acting strictly on impulse that's driven by white supremacy. And that white supremacy tells people who are unlearned, undereducated, who are in the streets trying to survive, they're battling against each other. And that's why in her profile, Vice President Harris found out that 94% of our murder victims and 94% of our murder suspects are undereducated. Our prison systems are filled with undereducated people who have been supervised by undereducated correctional officers. Yeah. That's the conflict we came into this country as, right? We came into it as property that could be sold, but now now that we're no longer that property that can be sold, what lingers is that resentment, that amused contempt that Frederick Douglass talked about. So even though you and I are educated, there's still a level of amused contempt, especially among those who are undereducated. Once we get to the more educated, the amused contempt is replaced with a resentfulness that's shoved down into impudence. Because the lies that we have lived, Dr. Henderson, and the lies that you and I project every day, we still meet the color line because it's still there.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? You have hit on quite a few areas. I really like the concept that you talked about of law officers having a master's degree or at least a bachelor's or a doctorate degree, having
Absolutely.
some form of education, because what education does is that it helps you to realize that many times all of us grow up with stereotypes and perspectives, and that some
Absolutely.
are good and some are not. But we begin to understand that in society, everyone really is the same. They just look through the lens differently.
Absolutely.
And that lens can be respected or it can be traumatized. And unfortunately, what happens is that when you have two traumatic experiences, you're going to have an end result that sometimes end up in death. That is unfortunate. That's sad to say, but that's the reality. That brings me to my next question. Please share your theory about quantum psychology as they relate to leadership, cognition, and behavior.
Absolutely, and it feeds into the discussion that we were just having briefly. You know, quantum psychology, the basis of quantum psychology is this. You can't take the individual out of the description of the observation. So if I'm observing an individual, and when I write that description, I first must start with who that individual is. And quantum psychology, that subconsciousness, it's the quantum self. Well, who is that individual? Because who we are matters. So if we go back into the law enforcement question that you just posed, however that individual shows up in rags or as a scholar, who they are matters.
That's right.
Their experiences matter. Their perceptions matter. Their trauma matters. Their entire life cycle, whether they're 18 or 88, it drives a conversation around who they are. And so when we approach individuals, whether we're a law enforcement officer in leadership, in life and love, what we have to bring back to this social discourse is that the individual matters. So how I approach you, Dr. Henderson, is not how I approach anyone else. I have to approach you from who you are.
That's right.
So quantum psychology says, again, we can never take the individual out of the description of the observation. So if I observe you and I describe you, I must start with who you are first.
And that's right.
Right?
That's right.
And so in leadership, whether I was leading sailors and operating 4 nuclear reactor plants, been a minister of public schools, building public facilities throughout the state, operating my own nonprofit, the think tank, the HELIN Institute, where we focus on leadership research and leadership policy. I'll start with who the individual is. So all of my employees, I don't look at them as a collective group. I look at them as individuals.
That's right.
And I need to know who they are at the quantum level. I need to get to know their quantum self, because it dictates how I lead them.
That's right. That's right. You know what? It would be positive if every individual that attends any form of public education or collegiate education would have to, part of their requirement, to take a course in quantum psychology.
Absolutely.
And because what it will do is that it helps you, in a nutshell, it really talks about respecting individuals for their thought patterns, and understanding that if you are, I learned this, I was working at Los Medanos College, and I was talking to one of my colleagues, and I recall saying that it was something simple. I had a bag full of lunch food, and the person said, "Oh, who made your lunch food?" And I said, "My wife." Well, this particular lady was struggling with male dominance.
Absolutely.
And so her first reaction to me was, do you fix her lunch? And then instantly I understood that I could take this conversation and make it into something positive or not. I said, I don't really have the skills to fix lunch, but what I try to do to do my share is that, I wash her car, I pay for her clothing, I do various things, and so we kind of work with one another to make the relationship equal. I said, but I do understand. I said, maybe I should think about that. Maybe one day she'll wake up and I'll fix her lunch. I'll fix her breakfast. I said, but the reality is that I really appreciate. I never went into a negative about my perspective about how I knew this conversation could go. I respected the fact that this person had a challenged perspective over something so simple from my perspective. But what was simple to me was something of attack to her. And I remember using that as a major point of understanding how to develop wisdom to perceive how people think even when they don't talk. Because sometimes how people think is found in their behavior. It's found in what they give off in their atmosphere without even knowing. And
That's
sometimes
true.
they don't even know
That's true.
that they carry this baggage, So I appreciate your description of quantum psychology very much. How have your professional writings contributed to your advocacy work regarding a law enforcement agency and an organization to uplift males of color?
That's an interesting question because, again, sticking with the theory of quantum psychology, I always start with myself. So if I start with myself, then by default, by nature, by God's engineering, I'll start with the African-American male because that's who I am. And I have never tried to live that double consciousness. I've always presented myself as who I am because it's futile for me to go out in public and present myself as something that I'm not. And so I've always been willing to live in my own skin. And so in law enforcement and in leadership and everything I've always encountered and engaged in the journey that I accept to embark upon, Professor Henderson, I've always led with who I am. I'm a mother's son. I'm a country boy from a little hick town in Tennessee. Well, that's who I am. That's where my perspectives developed. That's where I was initiated. And so I don't have to change my initiation. All I have to change is my view of the world. And I've always came in with open eyes. And I was blessed with a level of intellect that made me pause and say, it's not what I'm looking at, but what do I see?
That's right.
And sometimes, if you look at it twice, you see something different. If I look at it the fourth time and I see something different, I say, "Wow, what did I just learn here?" All right.
That's right.
So let me keep looking until I come to a national consensus of really what I'm looking at. Because if I look at you, the first day I encounter you, you come as that day has allowed you to come. But if I see you the next day, you come as that day has allowed you to come. So once I collect enough data on Professor Henderson, so now I can develop an opinion of you. Well, that first impression matters. Well, the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh impression matters. And that's what quantum psychology teaches us, that we don't show up every day as the same individual. Statistically speaking, you're not the same man you were 20 years ago. I'm not either, correct?
No, not at all.
Right? So if someone had an opinion of you 20 years ago, and they don't allow your 20 years of experience, trauma, sadness, happiness, to help them understand, well, he's not who I met 20 years ago. We have to be patient with each other. And so in my professional writings, I infuse all of that knowledge and wisdom into how I write, because I try and allow the world to see a perspective that they may not have. And as an African-American male, I try, because the fact is, some of us do show up in rags. Some of us do show up in wretchedness. But there's a counter narrative, correct? Some of us are scholars. Some of us are intellectuals. Some of us are gentlemen. So what the world is slow to recognize, that there's a counter narrative to what they believe an African-American male can be. And I believe what I try and present to myself, to my community, to my family, to my children, and anyone who wants to look upon me, is a counter narrative that may contradicts currently what they believe of an African-American male.
And I want to thank you for that response. And I want to just extend that to say that the value of every human is essential.
Absolutely.
Is that regardless of whether they come in rags or not, they still have value, even if they don't know they have value.
That's right.
Now, that brings me to my next question that I've been excited to get to. As a noted author of your recent book, Greatness is What Greatness Does, please share essential perspectives about this new and exciting book, and share with our media audience how individuals can purchase that textbook.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity. Greatness is what greatness does. If you just focus on that title, greatness is what greatness does, Professor Henderson. If we are great, then we do great. We don't have to go on social media and blast it. We don't have to run to a mountaintop and yell it from the top of the mountain. If you are great, you do great things. when you look at your career, you know, in music, you know, in education, and all the things you have accomplished, you've accomplished because that greatness was already in you, right? And you did not allow the world to hold it back.
That's right.
You know, you push the guardrails out of the way. You know, you overcome all resistance, and you've allowed your greatness to shine. So greatness is what greatness does. Is about you recognizing who you are by nature, that greatness that's already in you. And specifically, this book is about leadership because the subtitle is The 10 Principles of Exceptional Leadership in the Quantum Psychology Perspective. So start with yourself and start with the quantum self of others. And in that space, the first principle is perspective. Let's dive down into this concept of perspective. Understanding that my perspective is never going to be the perspective of those that I lead. And those that I lead will never have my perspective. So how do a group of individuals, whether you're running a company of 10 or 10,000, how do you merge all those different perspectives and lead in a manner that has a positive impact on the bottom line of the organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a Fortune 500, or a sports team? Because everyone has a desire to be great. So my greatness should never impede another person's greatness. So how can we be great together? So that's the second principle, is building those relationships based on what you have learned about the quantum self of the individuals. Because no matter how great we are and work and play, we do it in close proximity to others. So how do we build relationships, lasting relationships, successful relationships that gets everybody to their greatness? Because greatness is a destination, and we all are trying to get there. But we can't get there on our own. It's teamwork. So relationships is critical. And the last big concept, while there are 10 principles, the 7th principle is on people, processes, and paradigms. So when we get in these close quarters with each other and we determine how do we move forward successfully, we must understand what is going to cause us to fail. If it's poor leadership, poor communication, distrust, no plan, not well organized, then that becomes who we are as a team. Poor leaders, poor communicators, right? And then once we can identify ourselves as a collective DNA, then we create paradigm shifts. If there's no trust, then let's go build trust. If there's poor communication, then let's go build better communication. We must understand that we're all imperfect individuals. And imperfect individuals are not able to come in and arbitrarily and be a perfect organism. So it's necessary to understand that you're gonna need a paradigm shift to get to where you want to go. So those are the things I excitedly talk about in this book. But again, we start with a quantum self. And if you can't understand the quantum self, everything else we do are going to be extremely challenging. And that's why we have workplaces today, Dr. Henderson, where no one is happy. The cultures are poorly designed because they're not designed with the individual in mind. And we have to shift. We have to create a paradigm shift to where we get back to culture. And we got to create cultures where the 10 individuals or the 10,000 individuals matter.
You know what, Mr. Hickey, CEO Hickey, that was brilliant. And you know, it helps me to understand and to revalidate why I started this podcast.
Absolutely.
I started this podcast because I thought it was really interesting that every academic I spoke with, people were making $400,000, $500,000, $150,000, but nobody was ever satisfied with their job. And I noticed that every academic that I spoke with, I don't care whether it was in California, whether it was in Chicago, whether it was in Detroit, there was an ungratefulness. And I realized that one thing, People are not, it's never about money that makes people feel essentially valuable. It's about being heard.
That's right.
And it's about when a person is heard, that gives them a sense of somebody cares about how I feel. And unfortunately, sometimes I can say this from my own profession, that people who are in academia, sometimes, because especially faculty in sense, because they sometimes have a legal protection around their mouth and their voice.
Absolutely, absolutely.
They tend to think that the organization can fulfill their individual needs when in reality they cannot. Because that's not the goal of the organization. The goal of the institution is to educate the students.
Absolutely.
And so it helped me to understand the principles of psychology, vision, and heart.
Absolutely.
Psychology, real vision, and heart. And that is the reason I started this podcast, so that individuals will have an open space to be able to express their thoughts and to share who they are. Which brings me to my next question of who influenced you to become a great business owner, an author, a visionary leader, and a trainer?
You know, I don't know if there's one individual. Like I said, when I left home there from East Bakewell, Tennessee, I left with my eyes wide open. I knew what I did not want. I did not want the lifestyle that I was born into, that I inherited. I just wanted something better. So I left there seeking something better, while I was still tethered to where I was from. So I wanted to be successful, so that everyone understood that even in the bowels of racism and white supremacy, there's a little enclave of African Americans who could propel themselves in any particular direction, set their course, square their shoulders, and get there. I was trying to be an example to other people in my community who were just struggling and did not believe that their dreams would come true. And so I wanted to be a model of what a young African American male born into extreme valleys of poverty could become in this world, because and I always had the belief that the universe is our friend. It gives us what we ask for, not with our words, but with our actions. And so I was always willing to take the actions. And so I really was influenced by where I came from and what I wanted to become, and the example that I wanted to set for my own children, because they're watching. And so my children are my biggest influencers, because I want them to know that whatever they dream of, if they attach their ridiculous habits to it, they can have the life that they choose. And that has been the visionary leader that I've always tried to be, is that the universe really is our friend, irrespective of circumstance. Because if we bow down to what the world thought of us, say in 1850, well, where would we be, Professor Henderson?
That's right.
Right? Where would we be? We bowed down to that. And so I just always wanted to be that beacon. So I was influenced by the social constructs that said, well, you can't do it. I said, yes, I can, because God has the final say so, and I know he favors me.
Well, CEO Hickey, I hate to tell you, but that was your influence. Your influence were the obstacles that African American males faced.
Absolutely.
And so as a result of those obstacles, it gave you the opportunity and the desire and the passion to push forward. Absolutely. Which brings me to this question. What challenges, additional challenges, have you encountered as a professional man of color in today's society?
You know, I mentioned that I was in charge of 8 nuclear reactor plants as a very young man. Prior to getting promoted to that position, I had to go through nuclear power school. And at the end of nuclear power school, the academic side of it, Professor Henderson, I was at the top of my class. So the last day in that school, I met with the academic advisor, an older white male. Here I am, a highly intelligent, just a brilliantly minded individual. And all he had in front of him, he had never met me, I'd never met him. All he had in front of him were my academic results. And I was at the top of my class. He looked at me and he said, "You have performed well here, but I want you to know that as you get into, the nuclear Navy, your performance will not be comparative to how you have done academically." And said, but have no fret. There will always be a place for you in the Navy. And I looked at him. This is what I told him. I said, all you know of me is what you have there on paper. And I said, if I'm sitting here sitting here in front of you as a white male, I said, would you have given him that same conversation? And I got up and walked away because I was in the military then. He was a civilian. He held no rank over me. And so I just dismissed everything that he said. But what he did, he prepared me for how the world would receive me.
Absolutely.
All right? Because Frederick Douglass was correct. When you and I and other African-American men who are as accomplished as we are, when we show up, we are a contradiction. See, he had never had an African-American male come through that school and finish at the very top of the class. So I was a contradiction to him. And in his own ignorance, he allowed a ignorant narrative to flow out of him. And so instead of saying, there are some exceptional African-American men in the world, I just have not met them. Perhaps this is the first one. Let me prepare for the flood of these men. Because in essence, when they set up guardrails for us, Dr. Henderson, what they're doing is really cheating society. Because imagine all the African-American men that are nameless and countless, that never had an opportunity to thrive. Imagine what the world missed out on.
That's right.
And so that has been my encounter as a professional man. And even as I got toward the end of my career within public education, I was an assistant superintendent in public schools. I still met that same resistance, because when I showed up as the smartest man in the meeting, that did not bode well for me. And so we're still trying to push a narrative to convince the world, trust me, you want my greatness. Professor Henderson, we're still trying to convince the world as a collective group of African-American men that they want our greatness.
That's right.
And that's an interesting position to be in a society that looks upon us in amused contempt. And in most cases, they have decided, well, we're going to try and work it out without your greatness, because we do not want to recondition, retool, reevaluate our evaluation system, because as long as they do not have to reevaluate their own values, they can move forward thinking that all their actions toward us are correct. They don't want to acknowledge the contradiction. So that's been my experience. And in most cases, I have left people in their mindset.
That's a smart thing to do.
Because if you don't want my greatness, it's a loss to you. It's not a loss to me.
That's right. That's right. That is a powerful analysis, especially around the perspectives of non-African Americans, the society towards Black men.
Absolutely.
I am the sort of person who is black or white. and my emotions.
Yeah.
I either care for you or I don't.
Sure.
And that is the personality that I live with. And I've had so many countless situations in my profession where I have great respect all across the world, not just as a musician, but as an academic. I mean, I've engaged with so many different people through performing arts, through the higher educational institution that I've been employed at, that I've sort of garnered a great ability and confidence to understand that people that don't particularly care for you, that becomes a blessing to you.
Absolutely.
Because why would you want to spend your time at a table where you're not invited?
Right. That's right.
It's better to go to a home where the invitation is warm and welcoming.
Absolutely.
I have enjoyed our time. I want to ask you, you have so many different lives that you've lived professionally. Mm-hmm. You know, you lived in public education, K through 12 education. You've lived as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. You've lived the life as a law officer, as a social advocate, as a writer, as a community person. You know, you've had a lot of different lives. That means you've gone down a lot of different streets. And I don't see no gray hair on your head yet. So that's a good thing. So having said that, please share any final thoughts and ideas you would like to communicate to our media audience.
Absolutely. Let me first say thank you for this opportunity. And I want to follow up on the question that you asked earlier that I did not give the answer to. Where can you buy the book? HickeyHouse.com is my publishing imprint. HickeyHouse.com. And you can purchase my latest book and all books that I still have, in print. And the books are essential to who I am and to my nature. And it's one of the two things I want to leave your audience with. There's an old quote that an old mentor of mine has on his signature in his email communications. And what the quote says, the tails of the hunt will always favor. The tails of the hunt will always favor the hunter until the lions tell their stories.
That's right.
We must tell our stories, Professor Henderson.
That's right.
If we fail to tell our stories, the tails of the hunt will always favor the hunter.
That's right.
And lastly, what I will say to your listening audience, and I take this from Henry David Thoreau. Life is not about being lucky. It's not about arbitrarily purchasing a plot of land and digging for gold. He says, sink your shaft into your own soul, because that's where the gold is.
That's right.
And I tell the audience, with the resume that you so eloquently communicated, what I have always done is sink the shaft into my own soul, and I have always found gold. And you will too.
Thank you so much for taking the time, CEO Ronald Hickey, for sharing your life journey as the president and CEO of Professor for Life Incorporated. I see you as a continued academic, because academics is about education. And your education is not just about institutional education. You educate society, you educate corporate leaders, and what you continue to do as a visionary leader and trainer is to educate the world. We love you, God bless you, and thank you once again. Do enjoy a positive day.
Thank you. We love you too.
Be blessed.
Be blessed.
God bless you.